Hello, you're listening to Storytelling Saga, the podcast that shares stories. I'm your host, Allie, and this week I'm discussing story endings. And I touched on story endings when I shared writing tips last year, and I talked about how it's important to know your story ending before you actually go and plan out your story. That being said, your story ending can change as you actually write the story, but it's important to already have your resolution in mind. And the reason for that is because if you don't have a story ending, you don't have a story. It is the conclusion, the moment that you are driving towards throughout the book, throughout the movie, throughout the show. It is the lasting impression that the story leaves on the audience. And the thing about great story endings is that whether you saw it coming or not, whether it's a happy ending or a sad ending, if it's a satisfying conclusion, that is going to leave a lasting impression on the audience. So story endings where you didn't see it coming, with just amazing twists or something really creative or engaging, or something that really made you learn or really made you think, or just a great feel-good, happy ending, or even something that's sad but meaningful. Just any type of ending that is satisfying, that will just resonate and just make the work, whatever it is, TV, book, movie, play, anything at all the more engaging and enjoyable. So with these tips specifically, I found them through my research of various articles about story endings. So the first article is called Effective Story Endings by Glenn C. Strathy. And he talks about how there are 4 different types of story endings. And he says, the type of ending a story has depends on 2 factors: whether the story goal is achieved, success or failure, and whether the main character ends up in a better, happier, more content state than he or she began. There are 4 possible combinations. Number 1, comedy/happy ending. The characters achieve the story goal, and the main character ends up better off in the end. So those are the feel-good, happy endings where we were throughout the character's journey and seeing them struggle and work hard to achieve their goals. And then when they finally achieve that goal that they are striving for throughout the story, throughout the movie, book, etc., then it is satisfying, and we as the audience share in their triumph. So I love endings like that. And then number 2 is tragedy. The characters fail to achieve the story goal, and the main character ends up in a worse state in the end. So those are obviously depressing, but can be realistic and can still teach you things about life, of course. So those are important too. And then number 3 is commie tragedy. The characters achieve the story goal, but the main character ends up worse off. But maybe they learn something else out of it. And that's the kind of thing where be careful what you wish for. And then number 4 is tragic comedy. The characters fail to achieve the story goal, but the main character actually ends up better off. So that's learning from your failures. So that's extremely important too. And then he goes on to say how the story can have a meaningful ending to the reader or audience. So he gives these tips. Showing that the story led to a significant and therefore emotionally engaging change in the characters' lives. And as I said, with feel-good endings, that's the thing. It makes you joyful, puts you in a great mood. Or if it's a sad ending and you're just very emotional, but again, it's that emotional reaction from the audience. And when you tap into people's emotions and people can relate on an emotional level to the characters, that is just such a powerful thing in storytelling. His next tip is validating the character's choices, actions, decisions, or nature by showing how they, not random events, determine the outcome. So using the actual plot of the story to drive home whatever message it is you're trying to tell to the audience. Next, he says, providing justice. A happy outcome/judgment rewards characters who make the right choices. A tragic outcome should be the just punishment for a character's mistakes or flaws. So that's in an ideal world that a good character, quote unquote good, as in virtuous, as in morally righteous, a character who knows what he or she wants and works towards becoming a better person, if they are rewarded in the end, then again, that is a feel-good ending because it feels earned. Or if they are a bad, like morally, quote-unquote, bad person, and then they get their comeuppance, they get their punishment. But again, that's not always the case, but that's in an ideal world. And obviously with stories, at the end of the day, they are fictional. Yes, there are stories based on true stories, but fiction often imitates life and vice versa. And then he says, delivering the thematic message. At its simplest, the message of a story is that, when faced with such a problem, the approach or principle followed by the protagonist is either the best or the worst. Since the main character, obviously, we're following the main character on his or her journey, the protagonist is the one that has to have the biggest conflict and have the biggest stakes in the story. So they're the ones that we have to see the biggest change in the protagonist. So now another article is 9 Key Elements of Great Endings for Books and Stories. And this is by the Writers Relief Staff. So they break down tips for great stories for books specifically, but it can be used for movies, for anything at all. So number 1, the right ending. And right is in quotation marks. A good ending is in line with what came before it. Consider the Deus ex machina technique of ancient playwriting. At the last second, the gods swoop in and save the right people. The end. These days, that kind of contrived ending doesn't sit well with readers. The ending needs to be a logical, appropriate conclusion for what came before, not an ending that came out of the blue. So I absolutely agree with this tip. And don't get me wrong, Deus ex machina, if used the right way, can be often comical, but for just something that swoops in at the last minute, a Deus ex machina, which is literally God of machine, that's the term, when it just swoops in to save the day, those contrived endings just don't, in general, just aren't satisfying. It's better if the main character specifically knows how to resolve the story and is the one that resolves the problems or achieves whatever it is they're trying to achieve through their own growth throughout the plot of the story. Number 2, they say, the unpredictable element. Even though your ending needs to follow the action that came before it, the best endings aren't predictable. This doesn't mean you have to write a shocking plot twist, it just means the ending incorporates some element of surprise. So again, endings with great twists that you didn't see coming are always so exciting, especially the first time you read or watch it. But then what's cool is that when you go back and read the book or rewatch the movie, rewatch the show, and then you notice clues dropped along the way leading up to the twist ending. That's what's awesome too. So again, not coming out of left field, but planning it out accordingly, that it's still a surprise, but that it makes sense in the realm of the story. Similarly, they say, number 3, the plot twist. A plot twist ending can be ginormous or subtle, but what's more important is that it's not expected. Some writers have reported that the best plot twists surprise even them. Other plot twists are scripted from the get-go. Either way, a good twist feels surprising, but it's also natural, appropriate, and somehow right. And I definitely agree with that as well. When you yourself are writing something, you come up with something like, oh wow, this is a great idea, like as you're writing it, and then you just go with an ending that you didn't even think of from the start. Those really are the best kind of endings. If you can surprise yourself as a writer, you will, without a doubt, surprise the audience. Number 4, the dark moment. Your character's dark moment arrives when all is apparently lost. When the gulf between hero and heroine seems too big. When it's clear the aliens will win. When the truth makes the world look doomed and bleak. The blacker your dark moment, the bigger the emotional payoff if or when your characters triumph. So with that, that's basically saying that, again, upping the stakes and really making it everything to lose or everything to gain with a truly dark moment that really can be the lowest point for the main character, but then that makes the resolution all the more satisfying and wonderful when the main character achieves their goal. Number 5, the emotional epiphany or change. Your main character's eureka moment can make for a good ending if the moment is big enough. The moment can be one of sudden understanding or insight. Whatever your eureka moment, be sure it has big repercussions for your main character, but also for all the characters around him or her. So in order for your main character to have a big change or a eureka moment in the story, it has to be something relevant within the plot of the story itself, because then that just feels random and it doesn't feel earned or something that they achieved or learned that we, the audience, saw them grow from and learn in the story itself. Number 6, the could have changed but didn't dead end. If your book is character-driven or literary, this ending might be especially useful. In this scenario, your character is given a clear opportunity to turn his or her life around. Everything hangs in the emotional balance, but in the end, the character goes back to his or her old ways. See, that's a typical ending, I should say, in television shows. That in television, you want your characters to grow, but not necessarily change. And that's because throughout a series, especially with syndication, that you could watch any episode and just not have to know any background about the story beforehand, that it could be the same from episode 1 to episode 100, that the characters are still the same personalities, same dynamics, and things like that. But also it's because while it is important for your characters to learn and grow, it's not necessarily ideal for characters to have these 180 changes in shows, because once a main character achieves their lifelong goal in a series, then the series is over, because then you're not telling stories in that period of the character's life anymore, and then it loses the essence of the character if they achieved whatever they achieved. So then that's the end of the series, so to speak. So that's why that's specifically important in television, to not have the characters change too much, that they can grow and learn here and there, but not to really change as a person and change who they are, since we're watching them each and every week and throughout their daily struggles, that we relate to that as the audience. Number 7, merging happy and sad. Often the best endings aren't exclusively happy or exclusively sad. By writing an ending that's both satisfying and full of complex emotion, your reader will be thinking of your story long after he or she turns the last page. But as always, it's important to know your genre. If your readers expect a 100% happy ending, give it to them, or joyfully embrace the risks you take as a writer and cultivate realistic expectations. Of course, there are ambiguous endings as well, where it's a little more open-ended, not fully resolved, all of the story threads not fully tied up. Those kind of endings then leave the door open to sequels or even prequels or just a continuation of some sort. And that's also realistic to life in general, that not everything is necessarily black and white. Not everything's 100% happy or sad. So those kind of endings can be really interesting too for the audience to kind of interpret it the way they want to. Number 8, leave room for interpretation. Some great endings are open-ended. When you leave your ending open, you get people talking, thinking, and looking for answers. So as I just said, leaving things open for interpretation, that can be sometimes even a better ending for audiences to kind of piece together what they think happened after the story ended. And number 9, tie up loose ends quickly. After the climactic moment, don't linger with long explanations of what happens next. Once the party's over, go home. Scenes that follow the climax tend to be low tension. So just quit while you're ahead. Don't let things linger too much. Just really pack the punch with that final great line of dialogue or final great moment. Because, as I said, that is the lasting impression of the movie, of the book, of the show, of the play, anything at all. That final image, that final moment of your story. And now another article is How to Write Satisfying Story Endings. And there's no author, but the website is Creative Writing Now. And these are a few tips shared in the article. Effective endings show or suggest the result of the story's conflict. Effective story endings come from the main character's actions. Satisfying story endings use elements from the story's beginning and middle. Great story endings make the reader feel something. So that's just summarizing all these things that were touched on in these other articles as well. To make the audience feel, whether it's happy or sad or angry or scared, anything at all, whatever it is in the genre of your story that you're trying to convey. To have it feel earned for the main character, because then it's all the more satisfying. If you're going to have a twist, have it still be logical within the story, not just something totally random. To have the character learn something through this ending, thus then the audience shares in the character's growth as well. And obviously building towards the ending through the beginning and the entire middle, just the rising action, the climax, the falling action of your story. So obviously the entire story, you could argue the beginning's very important, the middle obviously, and the ending, but without an ending, as I said, there's no story. The ending is everything. It is the resolution, the thing that your character achieved, the thing that you wanted the audience to take away from, and maybe the audience will take something else away that you didn't even yourself consider as the writer or as the storyteller. So that's always great too, when you have an ending that can be interpreted not just in one way. So for me personally, I love feel-good endings because you just can't go wrong with that, putting you in a great mood, something that's happy and joyous, and again, that your character earned. Sad endings can be great as well, because they can just be so meaningful and poignant. And twist endings are always awesome and exciting too. So there's just so many different types of endings that are just so satisfying to witness as the audience. And with that being said, I do have a short story to share. I wrote this story back when I was in college for my advanced fiction course, and coincidentally, it is called The End, and it's another really short story. This was just one of our assignments that we had to write. So here we go. Without further ado, it's story time. "I'm sorry, but I'm afraid we can't continue doing this anymore," Rebecca said. "Why not?" Patrick asked, his fingers curving against the desk between them. "Well, for one thing, you're almost 15 years younger than me," Rebecca explained, her voice perfectly calm. "So?" asked Patrick, his voice anything but calm. "So it's a bit unorthodox, don't you think?" "Well, I suppose it's a little strange, but still, we've been doing this for months now, and you've never had any objections before." Rebecca stared at Patrick for a long time, when finally she sighed. "All right, look, the truth is, Patrick, I've met someone else." "What?" Patrick asked, rising from his seat. "Please, Patrick, you have to understand. It's not you, it's me. I needed a change. I needed someone older, more experienced." "Are you saying I'm not experienced enough for you? I've taught you everything you know." "Don't make this harder than it already is," Rebecca said as she stood up and headed for the door. "Wait," Patrick called, holding out his hand. "At least tell me the guy's name." "Her name is Linda," Rebecca said. "My coworker recommended her to me. Apparently she's one of the highest-ranked personal trainers in the state. I'm sorry, Patrick, but this is just the best option for me. It's been a pleasure working out with you." Alright, that was the end. So as you can see, what I was going for was that leading you to believe it was the end of a relationship. And it is a relationship, just a professional relationship. So I had those cliche, it's not you, it's me, purposely thrown in there, and then there you go. That was a little twist ending at the end there. And our writing prompt for that was the first line of dialogue. "I'm sorry, but I'm afraid we can't continue doing this anymore." So that was my little scene that I wrote. And with that, that is going to conclude this week's episode of Storytelling Saga. You can follow the podcast on Facebook and Instagram at Storytelling Saga, as well as on Twitter at Storytell Saga. You can also send me any questions, comments, or writing prompts by leaving me a message in the contact section of storytellingsaga.com or by sending me an email at storytellingsaga@gmail.com. Next week, everybody wants to be us. I'll be discussing The Devil Wears Prada. Until then, thank you for listening, and remember, write what you love.